This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.
Start off 2018 right with a trip to Breckenridge, Colorado for the annual Big Beers, Belgians, and Barley Wines Festival. January 4th through 6th, meet top brewers from around the country, enjoy world-class skiing and snowboarding, attend special beer dinners, and taste some strong, inventive, and warming beers with fellow enthusiasts. Check out bigbeersfestival.com for more information.
Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, editorial director, and co-founder of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest today on our podcast is the co-founder and head brewer, or whatever you call yourself.
Head brewer
from Neshaminy Creek Brewing, Jeremy Myers. They are in Croydon, Pennsylvania. Brewery, almost 20,000 barrels per year today, or this year. They produce a wide range of styles, everything from lagers to IPAs, have a few hot beers, and you've won a few awards along the way. 4-time Brewer of the Year as named by the readers of Philly Beer Scene magazine, 3-time Brewery of the Year. Yep. You are four in a row and 3 in a row on that. So pretty dominant in the in that mid-Atlantic Pennsylvania area.
It's been a wild couple of years.
So welcome to the podcast,
Thanks
Jeremy Myers.
For
Let me give you some background on this. I've known Jeremy for an incredibly long time, since long before either of us were involved in craft beer. In my early days of media and publishing, I launched a ska magazine, a ska zine, in 1995. Jeremy at the time had just launched a record label, Jumpstart Records, releasing ska and punk music. I did a lot of work for him, did a lot of graphic design work for Jumpstart Records, designed the Jumpstart Records logo that's still in use. We've spent a lot of close personal time together as he evolved and attended Siebel and got into the craft beer and brewing, the craft beer scene. I was paying attention and drinking his beers, and then of course we launched this magazine in 2013, and he was one of the first people I connected with to get information about beer and brewing and to feed into our content stream. And so it is my honor and pleasure to have Jeremy on the podcast as we get this podcast rolling. And
thank you so much for having me.
About beer.
I appreciate the invite.
Absolutely. And part of it's your fantastic gravelly voice that is so good.
It's perfect for radio.
Absolutely perfect.
It just rolls off. Exactly. This is my natural voice.
Exactly. So we're going to talk about brewing today, and we're going to talk about making beer, because that's what we talk about at Craft Beer and Brewing. Some of the beers that you make, the beers you've won the most awards from, seem to be on the kind of lager and traditional style category, but the beer you make the most of is IPA.
Definitely IPA.
So let's talk about your IPAs first. County Line IPA was one that I remember tasting in your 2010 as you were getting that tasting room, getting the whole brewery up and running and built on a fateful night. Oh goodness, I remember that night.
That was a good night. Yeah. Was it raining that night? I feel like it was
raining that night.
Yeah. I feel like there was water in the brewery too, because the roof was leaking.
I have a picture of you wearing a captain's hat.
Yeah. The tour guide. It's his tour guide, I think.
Okay. Those were days when you couldn't sell beer out of the tap room. Of course, that tap room wasn't open because the brewery wasn't open. But
actually, at that point, Pennsylvania law only allowed you. I'm fairly certain that when you were there at that point, Pennsylvania law only allowed you to sell with a G license, production license, brewery license. You could only sell cases and kegs. So how much Pennsylvania has changed over the 5.5 years that we've been in business is crazy. So much of it was nothing that we ever thought we'd. It was never in the business plan.
Right.
Things that we were never going to do or weren't going to be able to do. And I mean, for example, when we applied for our TTB brewery notice in November 2010, the law got changed. I want to say it went into effect, or it was signed December of 2011, that now then changed it so that production breweries in Pennsylvania could sell any quantity they want for off-premise. So you could do cases, kegs, bottles, crowlers, growlers, 6-packs, 4-packs, whatever. But prior to that, you couldn't do any of those single 22-ounce bottles, 750s. It always had to be at least a case or more. So if you wanted to get a case of, if you wanted to buy, sours directly from the brewery, you'd have to buy, 12 bombers or 12.
Who doesn't want a case of 12 bombers of your highly acidic beer?
So they changed that in December of 2011, and then fast forward to May of 2015, they then went basically 180 and changed it so that we could then sell beer for on-premise consumption in addition to all the off-premise sales. So that then lent us to opening a tap room. And then from that point, it's changed so much where the state is now basically giving us a full liquor license as part of, like, I don't want to say concessions, or just kind of exchanges and laws that now allow the grocery stores to sell wine, the wholesale distributors to sell less than a case. They can now sell 6-packs and 12-packs. As part of all that, they then allowed breweries to sell Pennsylvania mead, wine, and cider, along with any distilled spirit you want, whether it's from Pennsylvania or not. So we currently now have, we have a house red and white that comes from Chatsford Winery, and then we have cider from Stone and Key Cellars out of Montgomeryville, and then Haymaker mead as well. And then we do carry some Pennsylvania spirits, but we usually, at least in the tap room in Croydon, we save them for the brunches, the annual, well, not annual, the monthly brunches. So we do like some mixed cocktails and beer mimosas type things. With the spirits and whatnot, but we don't do a full liquor service at the tap room, just the wine, mead, and cider and beer. So, but it's to see where that's come. In 5 years, I would never have envisioned any of that in the state of Pennsylvania at all.
I'm sure that's quite a change for your business. Let's talk about County Line, though. Hops, how'd you settle on it? How'd you design this beer? What was the genesis of that? I mean, I know when I talk to most brewers, they have an idea, they have a visualization of what they want it to taste like, and what they want the mouthfeel to look like, and how they want it to smell. And they kind of try to reverse engineer that with a mix of hops. But at the same time, you want to, the creative act is trying to envision something that doesn't necessarily exist yet.
Yeah.
Where do you pull on for inspiration around that? And what was the driving charge to create this beer that you probably had an inkling that you'd be making lots and lots of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that IPAs are usually the flagship or number one brand for a brewery. I mean, for that beer in particular, also going back to 2008 and 9, just leading up to, really kicking everything off in 2010, like applying for the TTB, everything. Like, all our batches prior to that, for us, New England IPAs, like Heady was just barely, filtering out of New England,
Right.
That's a funny word to say, filtering. It was barely getting out of.
Got all the puns.
Yeah, I got all the puns. That was unintentional. That wasn't even really. It was coming down. It was barely reaching our market. You might get a can here and there. It was, obviously pretty highly sought after, but still, to me, Sculpin was the be all and end all, and it's still to a certain extent. Although I'll be 100% honest, not for any particular reason, but I haven't had a Sculpin since the Constellation takeover. Not for any reason other than I just haven't. But to me, when Sculpin would make it to the East Coast and you'd see cases of it, originally you'd see it in bomber cases. You'd buy the whole case.
Sure.
That's when you'd take $100 and you'd buy a bomber case because you didn't know when you were going to see that beer again. So for County Line, it obviously gets its inspiration from the West Coast. It's a West Coast style IPA through and through. Aggressively bitter, aggressively hopped. But it's also more of a traditional American IPA recipe in the sense that it's getting hop additions and hop charges every 15 minutes. The other side of it too is Vinny from Russian River, in my opinion, and probably a lot of other people's opinion as well, wrote the book on how to make IPAs. So when you have someone like that's been an open book and resource, of how he's made IPAs,
sure.
you pay attention to that. You take notice. So we don't put any more than 10%. At least 10%. No more than 10% rather is going to be any caramel malt or anything like that. It's going to be all 2-row, 20% dextrose, upwards of 20% dextrose, and then maybe 10% is going to be like a C10 or C60 and some carapils. So in this particular case, County Line's a little weird in that regard because originally I was brewing it in the small test batches with just 2-row, but I was just always trying to lighten up the color and the body. So I eventually ended up on a 2-row Pils mix. So it's actually almost split half and half between 2-row and Pilsner malt. Then just
because why not have 2 grain silos out in front of the brewery instead of one?
That wasn't the idea, but we were going to have to do that anyway because of the large amount of German lagers we make. So, and then we do use a fair amount of Pilsner, so it's there. Might as well. You have 48,000 pounds of it at your access to to use it, so you might as well. And then it just has less than 10% of Carapils, Munich 10, and C60, and then the rest is pretty straightforward dry hopping, or excuse me, a hop schedule. Every 15 minutes. We have changed it a little bit over time. It used to be a first large kettle charge rate at 90 minute boil. So a large kettle charge rate at 90 minutes, and then hopped, gratuitously every 15 minutes. There's sort of a wave, high bittering charge, then kind of comes down, levels out a little bit, and then obviously as we get towards the later part of the boil and towards knockout or whirlpool and then knockout, we're increasing our charge. But it's Apollo originally was Warrior. I actually like Warrior more as a hop, but it's a little bit easier to get now, but then the growers in Yakima are just putting so much less Warrior in the ground as opposed to some of these other. And it's been a huge monumental shift towards the aroma and flavor variety. So Warrior contract pricing was going up really high, so it was not. Why would you buy Warrior for $12 a pound when you can get Apollo for $7?
Right.
And it's usually Apollo is a little bit more, a little bit higher in alpha acid too, alpha acid as well. So you're not using as much in the kettle. So that's the route we decided to go, and that's pretty much been the predominant bittering hop that we use for all our beers. Although the German beers we don't use American varieties.
Do you use Apollo in pellet form, or do you use it in extract form?
Pellet. Although we are going to start, we've been meaning to do it for a while. We've been wanting to. We can actually convert our Apollo contract to calculated, measured alpha acid canisters from Steiner. That's one thing I really like about what Steiner will do is we say we need X amount of bittering units. In this charge, they'll make the cans. They'll put it to those charges exactly, and then. It would make sense for us to do that now too, because we've now, since the original start of the brewery, we've divided the first kettle bittering charge to a first wort and then a first kettle addition. And we decided to do that because I definitely believe that there's a difference. I feel like there's less of a harsh edge to the bitterness. I think the bitterness is still there, but it's not so harsh or aggressive.
Right.
So breaking up that kettle charge to a first wort addition and then a kettle addition is pretty much the only other difference. I mean, there's been some major differences. I mean, obviously at the beginning we didn't have a hop contract, so the hops that we were using and the beer had been made with on the pilot version, we didn't have access to. And
right.
This is 2010 and 11 when contracts were really tight and the market, had basically the hop market just crashed and there wasn't enough out there, so people kind of went crazy. So we had to adjust initially, and we knew we'd get back around to getting and being able to use the hops that we wanted or had used originally in the piloted version. So there was times where there was a fair amount of nugget in County Line, but by the time we started bottling it, or definitely by the time we started canning it, we were under full contract, and the hops that we had, minus Warrior, the hops that we had used, we had done some test batches too, dry hop with Citra. Now it's dry hop with Mosaic, but by and large, it's so it's Apollo for bittering, Columbus, Simcoe Centennial, and Chinook. It actually goes Chinook, Columbus, Centennial, Simcoe, and then dry hopped with Mosaic. So, but it's. I don't want to say it's straightforward, but I mean it's as far as
it's a little bit classic, a little bit new school.
Yeah. I mean we're definitely taking cues from some resources and people out there that have paved the way. We pretty much all of our IPAs. They're gonna. I don't think we make a single hoppy beer that has over 10% of any grist that any caramel or non 2-row or base malt grist, whether it's Munich 10 or it's C10 or C40 or C60. There's never going to be more than 10% of that grain bill is going to be that, and then there's always nine times out of 10 there's always a charge of dextrose. There's always going to be some dextrose, whether it's 10% or 5%, 10% or 20%. It's somewhere in that.
I find the caramel malt move an interesting one. A lot of IPA makers over the last 5 years have moved to take that caramel malt out. These beers are getting lighter and lighter than they used to be when we all got into this craft beer thing. And some of it was initially just the experience of that lighter beer, lighter body. But now more and more research is coming out from brewers that are studying this, that greater oxidation occurs with these higher rates of caramel malt use.
Yeah.
And that it's accelerating the oxidation within packaged beer. And I know
the other side of that too is the flavor profile of those grains of that malt also lends itself to some of the properties that you get from oxidized beer.
Yeah.
So if you have a higher concentration of like caramel 60 in a beer,
yeah,
if that beer sits around, you're going to notice it. You're going to notice that oxidation because that honey. For me, oxidized flavors besides like cardboard and wet dog and all that stuff, like the thing I notice, especially in highly caramelized caramel beers, is that that honey character comes through. And it's overly sweet and it's not what you want. So that's definitely another reason why we kind of shy away from that stuff as well. So.
Sure. So what seemed like a happy accident or a coincidence, in fact, has had some significant impacts on the way that these beers hold up and the way that hops express themselves in these things.
Yeah.
So dry hopping regimen for you guys?
Again, kind of going from the book that Vinny wrote. County Line is.
You're welcome to worship within the Church of Vinny because I'm a serious acolyte on that church.
Well, I definitely worship at that church, but the other side of it too is it's not. It's a guide. It's not a rule. So for us, especially when you're starting a brewery and you want to make West Coast style IPAs, and you have what is arguably the best West Coast style IPA maker,
right?
And he's been very open with the information that he has. Why not take that page and run with it?
Yeah.
So that's Caroline's the same thing. The dry hop, the amount and the time is based off of Pliny. It's just the first dry hop of Pliny. The same amount. We don't double dry hop, but it's the same amount per barrel. So it's directly driven from that. And it's no secret. I tell people that all the time. So it's it's definitely a West Coast IPA. I mean, it's kind of funny because so many people are now making hazy IPAs and cloudy IPAs and lower bitterness IPAs. Obviously, they're not nearly as bitter as their West Coast counterparts. We get a lot of people that are like, "Thank you for making a West Coast IPA." It's funny. It's
interesting.
It's more. It happens.
The backlash
more.
Is real.
I don't know if it's a backlash. It's just that there are people that they have. This is the IPA that they want to drink.
Right.
Whether it's like IPA to me has always got to have a firm bitterness. It doesn't have to absolutely wreck and destroy my palate. But it has to have a bitterness to it, and that's one of the things. I'm not very fond of the New England style, and that's. I think also something that's been repeated to us by a lot of other people that they want that bitterness there. I don't. Again, we're not trying. The IBU wars of the
right
of the mid 2000s. 2005. 6, 7, 8. There was this weird race to put 1,000 IBUs in a beer. That was always dumb to me too. But I do enjoy bitterness in my beer, but I don't want it to feel like I'm gonna have to scrape the resin of the hop off my tongue.
Right.
I wanted the bitterness to almost like clean my palate, and I wanted to have a good aftertaste and ride for a little bit, but I don't want it to be like I'm, eating barbecue and I can still taste the beer that I drank a half hour ago. That type of stuff.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, Caroline's definitely, your prototypical West Coast IPA, and that's by far our biggest seller,
When shape of hops to come, your double IPA has become a breakout hit in the region and is growing rapidly.
Yeah, it's our number 2. It's neck and neck with Caroline, and actually in Southeast PA, so the Philadelphia area, Shape cans actually outselling Caroline cans right now.
Wow.
But Caroline's still outselling Shape in New Jersey. But yeah, it's Shape is. Again, pretty much every every hoppy beer, well, not just hoppy, but every beer we make, you're always trying to learn or do something different, from what you've done before. So, I mean, when I say, we've done things that are close to New England style IPAs, we've taken characteristics or processed things that are, from those styles and taken them because we think that that's useful. Or it's, for example, like biotransformation. I believe in that. We just can't do it on our most of our beers because we need yeast out of the bottom of these tanks to harvest into to brewing other tanks. And so once we get a prop system, we're going to start dry hopping 2 days in into fermentation like we'd rather do, because I'm a big fan and believer of biotransformation. But then there's other beers like Caroline. That's just, it's Shape on steroids. That's all it is.
Yeah.
It's more or less except.
You mean Shape is Caroline?
Excuse me, Shape is Caroline on steroids. Excuse me. It's. And then the only other side of that too was double dry hop, but with Citra instead of Mosaic. And then we switched up a few things in the middle I was trying to look for some hops that would be different than what was out there, or what people were really using. One of them being Topaz, which at the time our rep from Country Malt Group had come in and give us a sample that we did a dry hop to Firkin with, and we really liked it. So I said, hey, I'm going to try making a beer with this. So Topaz, and then Newport, which is a hop that most people
Sure.
like, what is that? Where are you? Why would you pick that? Again, I was also looking for some hops that we'd be able to get readily. It's not like I was it doesn't take a genius to go out and try to make an IPA with Galaxy, but it's going to take I don't know, you're going to have to sell blood to get the hop in the first place, and that's what we weren't trying to do.
Right.
We wanted to be able to make a beer that we wanted with the hops that we could get. At the time, not a lot of people were using Topaz, and unfortunately, no one's going to be really using Topaz much more, including us, because our entire contract for this year got cut, and we're being told that we're not going to be able to get it next year.
Yeah.
So we were able to get some 2015 harvest spot. We bought like 2,000 pounds to get us through the rest of this year. But it doesn't look like we're going to be able to get it next year. So Topaz is going to be a tough one for us. Newport's not a problem. But yeah, I mean, we were looking at some of the characteristics of those hops and what we experienced using them. Newport was the only one out of all those hops, Newport was the only one that we hadn't used before. But based on what we were seeing, it's different characteristics. It's like its oil content. It's myrcene and stuff like that. These are things that I was like, all right, well, I like these numbers, let's try it. And usually it's not super high alpha. I'm not really, especially when it comes to late kettle hops. I'm usually trying to look for sub 12. I don't even like to go that high if we have the choice, but to like 10 alpha acid is usually what I'm looking for, and Newport fit into that profile as well. So that more or less shape is just Caroline on steroids, and different hops, double dry hop, again following more succinctly in the double dry hop of Pliny, and it's just at the time when we released it, I don't think anyone, Dirt Wolf from Victory was the only brewery, and Victory was the only brewery I think around us that was making a super assertive West Coast style, double IPA, big double dry hop. And I think that's one of the reasons why people, connected and latched onto it so quickly. I mean, also putting it in a 16-ounce can, then people start making comparisons to obviously other breweries and stuff like that. So, I never took a lot of the things that were being said, like people have told me like, oh, this is like a heady killer. I'm like, no, it's not. You might like it more than heady, that's fine, but it's not. They're both double IPAs, but they're not the same. You're comparing apples, and to me anyway, you're comparing apples and oranges. I'm glad you like the beer, but that's fine. That's also not why we made it. We made it because we want to make a big assertive double IPA. And again, I kind of going back to the conversation we were having about Tommy Arthur. I mean, Pizza Port and Mort Brewing Company are a huge influence on me. I mean, we make a double IPA called Ecomus that is a double IPA version of Simcoe City, at least in my head, what Simcoe City is, which is like my favorite IPA that I've had it several times at the Solana Beach Pizza Port, and to me, that is the be all and end all. That is my IPA. Every time I have it, it tastes exactly the way I remember it. I love Simcoe as a hop. It's by far, if it's not my favorite hop, it's definitely top 2. Sure. But that, to me, that's where a lot of the inspiration comes from. I mean, actually, yesterday at the Microstar event at the View House, they had their Graveyard Pale Ale, and I got it. And I was like, well, this isn't a pale ale. It's definitely an IPA. It's way not a pale ale. But to me, that's what they that's what they do, and they do it great. And that's where we take our clues. A lot of our cues rather from. But that doesn't mean that we haven't shifted, and every hoppy beer we've made since has changed, somewhat, whether it's, the hops we're using, the process, the malts we're using. We're definitely, I'm trying specifically, when it comes to, in regards to New England IPAs, I'm trying to do, to mimic things or go towards things like, more of a rounded feel, less bitterness, but I still want there to be bitterness there, but I don't want it to be as assertive or aggressive as like Shaper Caroline. We're looking for that biotransformation. I don't mind if it's hazy.
When you say biotransformation, for those that may not be familiar with it, what we're talking about is pitching a dry hop while there's still yeast, before yeast has hit before your beers hit a terminal gravity, while it's still fermenting out. And the thought is that there is some beneficial interaction between that fermenting yeasts and the hops flavors.
Yep. A lot of the conversion of of the oils and other essential flavonoids in the hop to more citrus or fruit-like characteristics. So actually, I was talking to one of our brewers the other day where he had read a white paper that there is some researchers had done a similar thing with coriander, and like the lineal in coriander goes through the same biotransformation as it's as it does in hops. If dry pitch or dry hop, dry coriander, 2 days.
Sure,
and,
I mean, it's the same oil.
I mean, you think of it. I mean, you have this chemical reaction for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
Yeast it's a natural organic process. So it's creating heat, it's creating energy, it's a chemical reaction. So you're going to have, if you're adding an ingredient into that, I kind of, we almost call it like it's actually like putting gasoline on a fire when you're doing it, and you have to be very careful when you do it as well, because and I've seen it happen twice now, where if you're not paying attention or you do it too fast, you're going to get a bath of about 300 gallons of beer that will shoot out of the top of that hop port. I've seen it happen twice in the past 4 years, once in the past month. But you have to be careful. Even if the beer is not at active fermentation, you can have a lot of nucleation sites that the CO2 will break out real hard when you dry hop. So if you're not paying attention, even when the beer is at terminal gravity, when dry hopping, it can happen, and it's even harder and something you have to pay attention to a lot more when you're doing it when you're at the height, at high fermentation. So, yeah, I mean, that's something that we've been messing around with. Like, so our new session IPA, keep it on the down, keep it on the DL, keep it on the down low. That is using a combination of a few different things. So there's oats in that, and we're mashing higher, so we have more body, a little bit more residual sugar. We're not, it's also not nearly assertively hopped as much. There's a small first wort charge, and then there's nothing until the 30th minute. And which, even by a lot of standards, when it comes to a New England, we're not trying to be a New England, but we're trying to use, we're shifting a little bit.
Right.
Also, a few things that have changed that we've noticed that we've been able to calculate, or at least more accurately measure, is that we, from when we started to where we are now, we're getting a lot more late kettle efficiency and utilization rates from our hops. So, we're now relying more on late kettle additions for those IBUs as opposed to like huge charges at the beginning and carrying through like every 15 minutes. So like a beer like Keep It on the DL, while we're doing things like we have oats, so we're and there's less dextrose in that. We're mashing higher. It's got a small first wort charge and then nothing until the 30th minute. On a 90-minute boil. All these things, and then we're dry hopping 2 days into fermentation. All these things are process that were driven specifically from the New England, IPA style. And then one of the things I think it's cool that we do with this beer, and we've done with a couple other beers now too, is that we're obviously trying to reduce as much oxygen ingress as possible. And dry hopping a tank traditionally, like you normally would with a ladder or a scissor lift, and you go up and you open the hop port and you dump everything in, and then you're just exposing all that beer to oxygen, and then trying to to blow CO2 through the cone to push it out. One of the ways we've worked with one of the new tools we have, being a centrifuge that we got a year ago, is that we'll dry hop 2 days into fermentation, and then we'll have a 7-day dry hop. And if the beer has a second dry hop, we'll then crash it after it's at 7 days. We've done a forced acid test, make sure everything's good. After 7 days, we'll crash it down to 32 degrees, hold it for 24 hours, then spin it through the centrifuge into another tank with the dry hop already in the tank waiting for it. And the tank's been purged down below 25 ppb. So our oxygen pickup, that's as far as we can do right now, is probably the best we can do is eliminating as much oxygen with what we have in-house. And I honestly believe that's made a huge difference in some of those beers. They taste fresher, even when they're super young. And then
I believe it, and I think that's something that a lot of beer fans don't really realize, that this is a highly technical process, investment, and structure that's needed to make some of these products and to continue innovating so that you can get them to taste as good as they want. I remember I was talking to Phil Leinert of Ommegang, and when they started making IPAs, they had to do the same exact thing. I just wasn't happy getting some of the slightly oxidative flavors out of those IPAs, and they had to they've moved to a fully purged dry hopping regimen so that they could eliminate oxygen at every single part of the equation. And that sounds like you all have done the same thing, a little different structure.
When you have if you have the tools in the tool shed, you try to use it. And the centrifuge is not just a tool for clarifying the beer and getting more beer, liquid out, and increasing your production and yield. It's something you can do in that regards. Where why not spin the beer onto the second dry hop, with a tank that's been purged, pretty low. So we're minimizing that as much as possible. And then from there, we'll then rack off of that second dry hop. So any organic material, whether it be yeast or, trub or hop that was in the beer, prior to the first, spin is gone. But anything it's, any dry hop that we go on to, anything that ends up in the final product, that's fine. Again, I don't have a problem with hazy beers. In fact, sometimes I want more of that, because then it's also a pure expression of just the hop, as opposed to, the reason why those beers don't stand and they don't last very long, they degrade and so quickly, is that protein in that yeast kills it. It's great for 2-3 weeks, and then it's like it's a nosedive. By doing what we're doing, at least we feel we're obviously we're eliminating 2 out of 3 things that make that beer spoil quicker. So, and we're still keeping an aspect that we want. So I'm not saying it's perfect or it's the best or the greatest, but it's worked out pretty well for us. We're going to do another version. So we did something that was actually built exactly like that, which was Shape of Haze to Come, which is just shape. It's shape of hops to come, but the hop regimen is completely changed. There's no, it's not like a huge, there's no, early kettle and nothing. It's one small first wort charge, and then nothing until the 20th minute. And then it's 20 minutes, it's like 20, 15, 10, 5-0. And then we whirlpool for 45 minutes. 15 minutes in the whirlpool, we'll add another charge. And then it's all the same hops as shape, except for the dry hop is Mosaic and Citra, and it's a double dry hop again. Same amount, so same exact. So we're doing that again here next month, but we're gonna do a mango version of it. So we're gonna do the same process, but we'll do the first dry hop, 2 days in fermentation, 7 days, crash at 32, spin onto the second dry hop. But the second dry hop is going to be the dry hop and the mango. And then, so again, we're going to rack off of that second dry hop and the mango directly to packaged beer. So I expect obviously to have the haze from the dry hop, and then also pectin from the fruit, which would probably make it hazier. But the beer does, all those, those 5,000 cans that we do each, of those tanks, and they're just little mini kegs running around there with more surface area, so that it does dry or drop out pretty quickly and clarify pretty quickly. But it's hazy. Again, that's combining both worlds. So that makes us, I don't want to say more comfortable, but we're definitely a process and a quality-driven brewery. So these are things that we're trying to do. Now, 2018, we have 2 straight up legit New England style, IPAs that we're going to make.
You're going to do it.
But we're also doing this under, the conditions that we want and that we're going to set. We're not making them just because they're the hot thing that people want. We want to drink them too, but if everyone else is doing it, why do we need to make every single one of ours?
Well, there's a couple truisms here, and one of those is that on the leading edge of New England IPA, New England hazy style IPA makers, even those that are leading that charge are working to get yeast out of those beers, and a lot of them now have 0 yeast, and that haze that they're producing in the beer is not from yeast, because yeast leads to instability in that package, and they are also trying to reduce that protein as much as they can, because they don't want anything in those that can precipitate out. If you want to maintain that haze, you need to treat it like a Hefeweizen, and use some of the historical strategies for that, and that does not include leaving a ton of yeast in there. And some of them that I've talked to are now they've tested and played them. They have 0 yeast left in these. Trillium, of course, is centrifuging their hazy beers. 13 in Colorado is using Clarity Firm on their hazy beers. Again, to drop proteins out. And so there's a number of different strategies, but the goal is to create stable haze. And not. I mean, it's not just stable haze, but it's stable beer. And if you can, it's one of those things too where I've said, a million times, that if you can make those beers taste like they do, and you can, 1, have more shelf stability, and 2, they'll be clear, do you think brewers wouldn't do it? They would, absolutely. I mean, just because there's a mindset and there's just this bias towards the fact that it's hazy, it's going to be good, because that is a real that's a truism in the market right now. But it shouldn't dominate or override your
your background and your abilities as a brewer and your knowledge as a brewer says and knows that if I can make this beer and it's clear, and if I can make this beer and it's hazy, and then I can make the same version that's clear and it'll last on a shelf or taste, like it should a month longer than it should or it was, then you think they wouldn't do that? Of course they would.
Yeah. So you're gonna make a clear New England style IPA?
No. Again, going back to the centrifuge, we've messed around.
It's the next trend. Yeah. Everyone's gonna be doing it.
Well, again, we are actually with Keep It on the DL. That's the idea is to be, it's going to be a little hazy because it's just taking racked off that second dry hop. But again, we're trying to make that beer as clear as possible with a little bit of haze, but also taste like those beers. You know? It probably right now it still has a little bit more bitterness than what most people would classify or want in that style, but that's fine. Yeah. Again, we're not calling it a New England; we just call it an unfiltered, session IPA, which is going to go full time starting January. So that'll be.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So your IPAs use mixes 5 or 6 hops in the lineup. That's that there's a number of brewers like Jeff Irway from La Cumbre that I've talked to before, and they're very clear and intentional about using bigger mixes of hops, given what we talked about before, the kind of agricultural nature of hops and some of the shifting characters in those. And they've always felt that using a bigger number of hops means that if they have to sub anything out or if something is changing, then the small changes that happen in each of those year don't impact the whole as much as if you are pitching the entire beer on this single hop and have it change in a significant way.
There's definitely a logistical advantage to doing that, but also I think, my experience, while you'll get a batch of this hop and it's everything you want it to be, is like you're not going to get that batch ever again.
Yeah.
So for me, one of the reasons why we blend or use multiple, like for example, Keep It on the DL is dry hopped with Citra, Kohatu, and Azaka. And that's a purposeful thing and reason why we've done that, because there's flavor attributes of each of those hops that we want and we're trying to meld together. For example, Citra obviously has that huge citrus note, that grapefruit, but it also can be pretty riney or pithy, a little bit of bitterness with it, and it's obviously got a little bit of it can be a lot of a pine note as well, resiny pine note. So we want that citrus forward and we want a little bit of that pine, whereas like Kohatu, everything I had read about that before we had done the pilot version of the beer was the biggest explanation or description was this tastes and smells like Fruit Loops or Fruity Pebbles, and I was like, I gotta try this one. So we did, and sure as right as rain, it smells. It reminds me of the milk in your Fruit Loops bowl. That's what it smells and it tastes like. And so that mixture with the Citra, and then also we get tons of tropical note like stone fruit, like peaches or apricots from the Azaka. So like you're getting it shot. Like Kohatu is like this mango and papaya or guava. This Fruit Loops thing going, and you have the citrus with pine coming from the Citra, and then the Azaka is more of this guava and this mango, this tropical fruit stuff. It just works. We're working them together. Whereas if you're dry hopping a beer with just one hop, that's going to be that note. That hop is going to define that beer. Which is fine. I enjoy that. I enjoy that as I'm not really big into smash beers, but and there's characteristics of single dry hop, varietal dry hops that I like as well. But I also, as a brewer, want to use all the tools in the shed, so to speak. Excuse me. So that's why we do a lot of blends. Lately, it's been a lot more blends, and we've done it a lot more actually with some of the dry hop saisons. We've noticed, we're pairing a lot of the fruit that we're getting from the ester, quality, from the Brett and from the sack that we have in our fooders, to dry hop with these. One thing we've done a little, I'd say wrong with our saisons is we've overly dry hopped them. I feel like there's at least what we're getting out of oak. You don't need to dry hop on a double double IPA rate,
right?
Because a lot of the flavors and aromas that you already have in the beer that you're gonna put with a hop, like you would think that because there's so much of it there that it would work well, but it doesn't. They actually clash more than working, in my opinion, and what I experienced out of our wood. What we've gotten out of our fooders. Like I'd say, like the first batch of Logic and Reason was too heavy-handed on the dry hop, whereas the second batch was much more in line. We were a lot lighter with a dry hop, and it worked much better.
What are your rough pounds per barrels number on those?
On Logic and Reason, or just across the board?
No,
so Caroline is actually Caroline's about 2/3 of a pound per barrel. Shape, because of the double dry hop, goes up to about 1.25 pounds. But we've done like Ecomis and Good Problem. Now you're edging up towards between 2 and 3 pounds per barrel. And then again, the first batches of some of our dry hop saisons were following that lead, and it was way too heavy-handed for the saisons, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
It varies. Again, it's a varietal thing too. There's certain hops that you don't have to use as much. Mosaic and Citra being like hops that are very pungent, very strong. Sure. If you're going to dry hop with those, you don't need to dry hop with as much of those as you would dry hop with say, Nugget. I know Nugget's not as sexy as the hop as it was years past, but I got to tell you what, the selection I did on Monday, the best hop on the table was a Nugget. And it was so unique. It was definitely Nugget, but it was such a uniquely good batch of Nugget. We actually, when our rep walked back in the room, I said, "Hey man, you gotta smell this Nugget. This is out of control. I've never smelled Nugget that was so complex. Like Nugget to me is usually like a lot of pine, a little bit of like citrus. Like it's somewhere between. It's almost to me, it's like the antithesis of Cascade. Cascade being this very floral and citrus forward." Hop where with a little bit of pine, whereas Nugget to me is always the opposite of that. It's a lot of pine with a little bit of citrus. Whereas this batch in particular was equal parts pine, equal parts citrus, and it even had like some tropical stone fruit and some coconut in it. And I had a rep smell it and rub it and smell it, and he's like, "I gotta go upstairs and tell them you guys found this." I was like, "We want our 5,000 pounds are coming from this." So, and that's cool because that's. Again, going back to the selection, not to harp on that, but that's, again, giving us the ability to, we can make a beer with that hop that, it's not going to be the sexy, cool, available hop, but I guarantee you, I feel like if we make that beer with that hop, it's going to be a really good beer because it's exactly what we want out of that hop. Whereas, if I just bought 44 pounds of Nugget on spot, there's no guarantee that's going to be what, I would more or less only buy it off a spot like that, not knowing what it's going to give me. That it's going to be like, well, we're making your basic American Amber Ale, Northwest Amber Ale, and we're going to use Nugget. That's what it's supposed to have, Chinook and Nugget, But no, we could definitely use this hop in some different scenarios. I would love to dry hop some saisons with it, and mix with like we've been doing a couple different lately, like with Calypso, Denali. Citra, got some Galaxy. We just did a version of a straight single yeast strain saison called High Plateau. That's dry hopped with Citra and Galaxy that came out real well that we were happy with. So it's mixing up hops I think is super important because again, you can like the characteristics of one hop, but you're not going to get that unless you're picking 10,000 pounds of that batch.
Right.
It's every year is going to be hard to replicate and duplicate that. So for me, one of the reasons why we do what we do when it comes to multiple varieties, and especially in the dry hop, is to play off of their characteristics, and also if there is an issue like Topaz,
sure.
We can figure it out.
Now, this talk of hop selection has to be utterly frustrating for anyone who's a home brewer. The act of choosing those hops is certainly not as easy as it is for somebody on the commercial scale. You've done a lot of home brewing in your time.
Still do.
Still do. All right. When you're buying hops at a homebrew store, what do you look for? How do you evaluate that? How many times have you opened up a packet of hops and not used it just because the aroma is not popping and it's not giving what you want?
So I've been very fortunate. I've been a professional brewer now for next May will be the start of my 10th year. So I've been lucky that when I am doing homebrew, I have access to the hops in the brewery. So I am a jerk. I haven't bought hops in a homebrew store in a while. What I have bought actually recently is we have gotten a lot of whole leaf for like our Hop Rocket, our Randall in the brewery. So we buy a fair amount of whole leaf to run Shape, Caroline, whatever through. So we are seeing a lot of good hop and a lot of bad hop. In that respect, I'd say there's it gets pretty sketchy. I mean, I think it's fairly common knowledge now that homebrewers have to know that when they're getting their hops, it's after all the brews do their selection, and they're not packaged. And this is something I know that the growers, are the brokers are trying to get better at, but they're not packaging these hops the way they're packaging the hops for production breweries,
right,
and whatnot. So
I would say there's a variety of that. There are some homebrew shops where they are buying larger lots, and those kinds of brewer packaging, and then cutting them up and then vacuum sealing them. But there's always a question of, are they doing that in a low oxygen or no oxygen environment?
I would be more likely to buy.
Or then there's BSG that's doing nitro flushed packaging straight out of their plant in Yakima in order to
that's a really impressive plant, by the way. It's a relatively new plant. So I think it's the newest processing plant in Yakima.
They say it's got the most up to date pelletizing technology in the entire industry.
Yeah, it's a real nice facility.
Yeah. So. But there is an attempt there to make sure that the hops that get out to homebrew shops are treated as nicely as the hops that get to brewers.
That would be the biggest drawback when I was homebrewing, is that you get some hops that are great and then some are just a mess. They're cheesy.
Right.
They're just old. The other side of it too is you have to go to a homebrew store. If you're just getting into homebrew and you have a local store, it's great to support them, but make sure that they're going through their raw materials quickly. Look at the dates on the yeast vials. Look at the dates on the hops. If they're a smaller shop, there may be a good chance that they're not going through inventory nearly as quickly as a larger shop would with a lot more inventory. Although vice versa, these larger shops carry so much inventory, they're not blowing through some varieties and some different yeast types as quickly as others. So you may have it. There's a good chance you might run into some older stuff. So don't be afraid to look at the dates. One of the things that I think is going to differentiate breweries in the coming years is really going to be ingredient driven, in the sense that the quality ingredients. We've been talking about quality hops, and that directly leads to the quality of the beer, but it can lead to the quality of the beer. I think it's something that's going to differentiate breweries now. Is how much are you really involved? In selecting your raw materials. Is it just hop selection? Are you going out to the working with the malt companies, or one of the things I've been dying to do for the past 5 years is I want to go to the malt school out at the University of, it's North Dakota, out of Fargo, and they go out to the barley fields and the barley growing training department there. I've been wanting to do that forever, for really the last 5-6 years. I've been meaning to do it, but I've been wanting to do it for a long time, and that's huge. That's important. One of the things I've been really trying to, I'm probably overly annoying about with some of our vendor reps, whether it be, Brees or whoever, is if they don't have the information that I want, then I'm going to move on to another provider, another, raw material, because I can get that information. For example, one of the things I really like that Hop Center does now, and of course Weyermann does it because the Germans are awesome, is that they have QR codes on the side of all their bags. And if you want to know what, if you're trying to stay consistent, and if you're one of the things we've seen is drift in our mash pHs, and that was a little bit, it was all 100%. We couldn't get some M10, so we were using Munich, 10 from Brees, and that had to happen for about a month, and we saw some shifts in our mash pHs that we were, I don't want to say concerned about, but obviously at the end of the day we're trying to get a conversion. And we want to hit those numbers, so we wanted that pH to be where it's always at. So we had noticed a little bit of a drift in that, so I had contacted the one vendor and said, hey, do you have a lot analysis that includes pH on this? No, we don't have that. I was like, why not? Because I can get it from Weyermann, and I can get it from Weyermann just by taking my phone and hitting the QR code, or, for example, our guys back at the brewery, if there's no alpha acid listed on the box, they don't need to ask us to call Hopsteiner or Yakima Chief. They can either take the code off, like the batch code off, and they can go right to YCH's website and plug it in, and boom, they have it. Or in the case of Hopsteiner now, being very much like Weyermann, they have a QR code, and boom. So we, in our production side, they have an iPad. They run everything through, so they can take it off the base, go over the camera, click it, and they get all the information they need right there without having to ask, the head brewer or our lead brewer Tom. So giving them as much information as possible, I think, is super important. And to the point about raw materials and ingredients, that's going to be the factor. And I think one of the reasons why, personally, I think that, for example, German beer, is so good, It's one of those things where you go to Germany, it's hard to have a bad beer, even what they consider bad beer. You're like, this is pretty good. Like, it's very rare you run into.
Sure.
There's obviously differences. Like this Helles is better than that Helles, but I'm hard pressed to think of a beer I've had in Germany that I wasn't like, wow, this is garbage. But that's because German brewers in particular are very ingredient driven. They're always looking for top quality ingredients, whether it be hops or barley, and that's sort of gone. It hasn't been a focus, or it hasn't been something that's been a priority to American craft brewers, because American craft brewers let's brew this, let's brew this, let's brew this. It's more about the experimentation, or like the freedom and independence you have as a brewer, which is great. Those are obviously super important things that part of the reason why I do what I do as well. But I also think at the end of the day that if you're not getting involved in more on a basic level with where your raw materials are coming from, you're gonna have those issues. And some things are in your control and some things aren't. You have no. If again the hop side, if you're not buying 5,000 pounds of these varieties, you're not going to be able to do selection. You can get a contract, but you're not going to be able to do selection. So you're going to be beholden to what they send you. And to a certain extent, you can do the same thing. As you get up in numbers and production, you can do the same thing with barley. With 2-row or Pilsen, you can say, all right, here's the 4 lots that we have available in the rail cars right now. Which do you want? And you can look at that model analysis and say, well, this is more in line or exactly in line with what we've been using all year. That's what I want. As opposed to them just saying, sending you whatever they send you.
Right.
So that's something that's going to, I think, really make a difference. And the breweries that are doing that are the ones that are going to, I'm not going to say there's a bubble coming, but, if there were to be a bubble, the ones that are doing that and concentrating on quality and are ingredients driven.
Well, that touches on an interesting point. There's a tension between that necessary creativity in the craft beer world and driving innovation forward and coming up with new ideas, engaging with drinkers with new beers, exploring new flavors, versus that old world focus on iteration and continuous development and dialing in and perfecting those beers. One thing that's become immediately apparent to me is especially when you start tasting one-off collaboration beers, most of them are suck. Yeah. And there are occasional great collaboration beers. I'm not saying that's not a thing that people should do, but everyone knows that the more times you brew something, the better you get at it.
Oh yeah.
And of course, the more times you brew something on a commercial scale, then the more in depth you can get with those ingredients, and the more you can understand the differences between those ingredients. And of course, the more larger volume, as we've said earlier, you can select better ingredients because you can contract for larger amounts. And so that's kind of a basic tension that we see now in craft beer between that repetition and getting better at it versus that constant innovation. I imagine it's a tough one to balance for you as a craft brewer. It
is, and I'll use an example that's happening in Pennsylvania right now. Is that Pennsylvania and Governor Tom Wolf have just initiated this program as part of the Pennsylvania Preferred. It's part of the Department of Agriculture, so it's really encouraging manufacturers, especially in the food and beverage, to use agricultural products from the state of Pennsylvania. And obviously, Pennsylvania being the largest producing volume craft beer state in the country. It helps that we have Yuengling and Sam Adams in our backyard too. You have the Yuengling Brewery, the main brewery in Pottsville, and then you have the Trexlertown Sam Adams Brewery. So they help the numbers, as well as obviously we have some brewers like Victory that are pumping out some fair amount of beer. But to encourage the brewers in Pennsylvania to use more Pennsylvania-based ingredients, they've created a program as part of the Department of Agriculture, their PA preferred program. So you can sign on, sort of like the Independent Craft Brewers logo you can put on your packaging now from the Brewers Association. There's a little PA preferred logo you can use as long as you meet these certain requirements. And I've had a few of the local malt companies reach out to us and say, hey, you want to get jump on board and be a part of this. I was actually quoted in Levittown Now online website for the Levittown newspaper. I wasn't misquoted, and I'll say that much, but it didn't make me look good. Basically, just said that we weren't focusing, or it wasn't a priority to us.
Oh wait, let me get this straight. You upset somebody with a quote to the press.
I don't think I upset him at all. He just the way, in context, the way he used it made me look like a jerk, which is fine because I wasn't trying to be a jerk when I said it. I basically, what I had said to him was like, this isn't it's definitely something we would like to do. I mean, obviously, yeah. I mean, if you can, that's a selling point. If you can, make a beer out of locally sourced, raw materials and ingredients, and it tastes the way you want it to taste, and it tastes the way it should, then you even if it costs a little bit more, you can sell it a little more because there is a drive, by consumers to be more local, which is great. It's exactly what we want to do. But the problem we have is that all of these smaller, micro maltsters and some of the hop farms that are popping up here and there, they aren't brewers. Or they're home brewers, but they aren't professional brewers, so they don't understand, completely what we're trying to do or what we do. They don't understand the volume. I can't use a local malt company to provide us with our Munich 10 or our Vienna malt for our, Vienna lager, because they're doing batches of 2,000 pounds, per shot, and we're using, a little less than 2,000 for a tank. So what they would take to make, a batch that they're then going to sell to either homebrew stores or other brewers, they just can't, and they can't make it fast enough. They can't turn enough of it for us to do that all the time. It's a specialty thing. We've done it. I mean, we just made a PA malt version of Churchill Lager that I was really happy with. I actually was trying to use Pennsylvania hops as well, but no one's growing, Holy Hallertauer or Tettnanger. In quantities that I could find in Pennsylvania, right. Anyway. But that's the issue. Like, I got a buddy who keeps on texting me because his parents just started a hop farm, and he's all stoked on, and I'm glad he's stoked on it, and I would never want to discourage anyone from doing this, but these are people that are not involved in the brewing industry that don't understand that, like, you want to bring a new variety of hop that's, to the market, that's $5 million in 10 years. That's not going to happen overnight. And then the Cascade or the Centennial or the Chinook that you're growing in Pennsylvania isn't going to be the same as those hop, the terroir, to steal right. a term from wine. That terroir in the Northwest is producing something distinctively different than hops from Michigan, hops from Wisconsin, hops from New York, hops from Pennsylvania. And it's not that I don't want to use those, but I'm not going to change, the Chinook that we're getting from the Pacific Northwest, suddenly the PA Chinook, because you're growing it. And even if you could grow enough to supply us, which you can't, not yet, and maybe never, more than likely never, because you just don't have the acreage. You're not going to get out of, like, every 15 barrel brew of County Line, the last edition in Whirlpool is 11 pounds of Simcoe and Centennial. You're probably getting 200 pounds out of that, your first year of hop that may not even be any good. What's the analysis? You're not professional brewers, but they're agricultural people, but again, that doesn't make the hops good. Their intention or their ability to grow is probably there, but if you haven't been, if you're not part of the Peralt family, then what do you have? If you're not, one of the families from Yakima that have been doing this for 100 plus years, there's experience and knowledge there that you need. That learning curve has got to swing real hard and real fast, but you also need to work closely with brewers, because you have to realize that, we just selected 20,000 pounds of hops for 4 varieties, and that's 2/3 of our contract. Our hop contract this year is worth more than the mortgage on my house. So I know that they're not growing that. And if they are growing that, that quantity, I guarantee you it's not the same. So that connection has to be made, because there's a disconnect between that. If they can make
it seems there's probably a target market for those hops farmers with smaller brewers than that do focus more on those one-off beers.
They definitely are. They definitely are focusing on those. But I think that again, it's sort of like going to the bank and trying to start the brewery in the first place. As soon as you see say a brewery, they have this idea of something that's completely different than what you're actually trying to do. And it's you see it when you do tours with people that come in the brewery. They look at the brew house and they're like, oh, how much that cost? Like $30,000? You're like, nah, man. You kidding me? Like $30,000? There's definitely a disconnect between what people understand and know about how beer's made, the ingredients we use. There's so many different angles to go at it. It's getting better. It's definitely, but the other side of it too is it's getting worse, because there's so many people. I don't want to say that are trying to jump on the craft beer train, but they see the growth, and rightfully so. If you see an industry that's hot and you are growing, 2-row barley, why not connect with a local micro malter that can use it? But that doesn't, I'll use an example like our lead brewer, our former lead brewer, Jason Rank, Jay Bird. He left and he's now the head brewer at another brewery in Center City called Second Story, and they're connected. They actually have a family farm. It's really cool. They try to do a lot of farm to table stuff, which I think is awesome. But one of the things I know that they had their second harvest of barley this year, and they didn't use any of the first year because they had it analyzed and it was garbage. That's because. And they're getting better at it, and they know that. And I know a few other people that have been doing the farm brewery thing where they've had a lot of problems growing barley because, just because you're a farmer, especially in Pennsylvania, you've probably been growing corn or soybeans, in switching over to barley and specifically to make barley that's good enough. Again, remember, barley that isn't good enough, for brewers is used for cattle. You know what I'm saying? So that's it has to be made to a high standard. It has to be grown to a high standard. And if you haven't been doing that for a long time, you need to jump that learning curve real hard. And then the other side is you can't, you're supplying a small percentage of, you're not going to be able to go to a larger brewery like, not that they're a huge brewery, but again, whether it's Trogs or Victory or Yards, like they're going to do a one-off. You're not going to supply them with hops and enough barley. And I think that connection needs to be made a little bit more more succinctly. But again, going back to the whole point, that's something that I think is going to be raw material and ingredient driven. I think that's going to be the differentiation between breweries that are making really exceptionally good beer and breweries that are just kind of towing the line, staying in business.
Start off 2018 right with a trip to Breckenridge, Colorado for the annual Big Beers, Belgians, and Barley Wines Festival. January 4th through 6th, meet top brewers from around the country, enjoy world-class skiing and snowboarding, attend special beer dinners, and taste some strong, inventive, and warming beers with fellow enthusiasts. Check out bigbeersfestival.com for more information.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.